time is 8:46. Hijackers deliberately crash American Airlines Flight 11, carrying 76 passengers, 11 crew members, into floors 94 and 98 of the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York. Please observe a moment of silence. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're here to remember September 11th, 2001. We are the National Iron and Steel Heritage Museum. I'm Jim Ziegler, Executive Director. We have the Lukens Band, we have dignitaries, we have first responders here. But we'll begin this morning with an invocation by the Reverend Sherry Dietz of Trinity Episcopal Church in Coatesville.
Let us pray. Creator God, loving God, today is a day of remembrance, an anniversary of a tragedy that has burned itself into our souls. So we pray to live with memory, with constant love, with the promise both to combat evil and to cherish goodness. Don't let our pain cloud our hopes or crush our hearts. As we have gathered to remember, we call on you, Creator of the earth, to guide us into using the power you have given us to create, not to destroy, to love, not to hate, to build instead of tearing down, to reconcile instead of breaking apart, to seek restorative justice instead of revenge. Guide our hearts and minds to remember that we are created in your image to be creative beings in this world. And we ask that you bless our day of remembrance. In the name of our Son, Jesus, your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Detail, uptake, forward, forward. Sector, present, go!
Ladies and gentlemen, just going to explain the order of events for today. We have the bell ringings of the significant historical times that occurred 16 years ago today. We will, at certain intervals, have longer gaps, as you'll notice, or as you may recall, and then we'll have some of our local dignitaries from the city, the county, the state, and the federal level of government offer their comments to us today on this significant event. It's also marked by music and by some moments of silence for thoughtful meditation. So that's what you can expect today. And the sound of steel making behind us. Couldn't have asked for a better backdrop today. So thank you for coming again, and we will begin the program momentarily. At 9:03, hijackers deliberately crashed United Airlines Flight 175, carrying 51 passengers, 9 crew members, into floors 78 through 84 of the South Tower of the World Trade Center in New York. Please observe a moment of silence. And at this point, I'd like to introduce Gene DiOrio, who is our local historian, and he will MC the program for us.
Thank you, Jim, and good morning to everyone. All our guests, our representatives of fire and police, and of course our many citizens of Coatesville. As Jim indicated, it's my pleasure and duty to introduce our program. First speaker is the president of Coatesville's City Council, Mrs. Hunt. Well, I'll go on to the next one. Oh, we have the county commissioners as the next on our list, and I'm happy and honored to introduce Kathy Cazzone. So Kathy, if you would, please.
Thank you, Gene, and good morning. And I want to thank the museum for once again hosting this tribute and remembrance of that awful day in September 2001. You know, when I think about that day, I think a lot about the juxtaposition of good and evil. When I think about the thousands of lives that were taken, the families who are suffering for the loss of loved ones, I think about the countless miracles, the stories that we hear of that day about people that were saved. When I think about the first responders who lost their lives, I think about the thousands of people that they saved because of their bravery and their commitment. And I'm so proud of the first responder community from that day and all of the first responders here in Chester County. Every year, this might sound a little silly, but every year I try to think about those things and think about the good that happened that day instead of focusing on the evil. And the one thing that helps me do that is a little album by a poet of our time, which is Bruce Springsteen's The Rising. And so I just want to read to you one passage of one of the songs that really fills my heart and makes me, helps me sort of get through this day. And I need these to do that. So the song is from the song The Rising, and it talks about the sky on that day. And he describes the sky as a sky of blackness and sorrow, a sky of love and a sky of tears, a sky of glory and of sadness, a sky of mercy and a sky of fear, a sky of memory and of shadow, a sky of longing and emptiness, a sky of fullness, a sky of blessed life. And that's what I think. I believe all of those folks who died that day are angels in heaven. They're with us each and every day. It is right that we remember their memory, and I'm grateful to be here with you today to have the opportunity to do that. Thank you.
Okay, please do.
Hi, my name is Joe Hamrick, and I'm in City Council. Carrie was not able to attend today, so I'm just going to fill in with her. I just want to speak about the responders, the first responders. What is a first responder? You know, a first responder to me is an unselfish person. Their first role as a responder is to save lives. And sometimes it's a thankless job to them because people don't understand what they go through, the emotions. The most important thing in their life is to respond to a disaster, to a wounded soldier. You know, I've seen this in my lifetime several times on the battlefield. You know, it takes a certain person when you're in a kill zone to go out there and save that person. It takes a certain person when that building is on fire for that responder to go inside because there's life in there that's still alive, that there's hope for that person to get to them and save their lives. Our fire department and the fire departments and the EMTs around this world are the most important people in our city, our police department, because we protect our citizens and they save lives. And I can never thank them enough for their job. And I want to welcome everybody here today because we have to always remember this day, because this is the most important day in our lives, because we did not think, we were so naive that nobody would attack us, and they did. And we fell asleep. And believe me, we woke up another tagger. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you for being present and for your message. What he said is terribly true, and I think a round of applause would be very much in order for our firefighters, our civil workers, the police, and so forth. They indeed do serve us and serve us well. Now, Terrence, I see Commissioner Farrell is here, and I welcome him.
Good morning. I'm very pleased to be here in the 16th annual remembrance of 9/11. I think my fellow Commissioner Kathy and I have been here each year. This event has been held here in Coatesville. And each year I do a little Google research to find out a little bit something new. I'm looking for the youngsters in the audience. How many here are under 21? It would be great to have more youngsters here to actually have them carry on the tradition, to be able to remember. But this year I'd like to talk a little bit about a documentary that's out now. It's called The Man in the Red Bandana. I don't know, has anybody seen that? It's online and also in the theaters in New York. It's about a guy named Willis Crowther, who was 24 on September 11th, 2001. When he was 10 years old, his dad gave him two handkerchiefs, a white one, which was for show when he went out, and a red one, which was to blow his nose. But on September 11th, 2001, he used that red bandana as a mask, and even though he was on the 104th floor of the South Tower, he went down and helped people get out and went back up, and went down, helped people get out, went back up, and ultimately died when the building collapsed. He was surrounded by a group of firefighters. The point is that on that day, not only were our first responders heroic, but also many, many individuals, civilians who helped pull other people out of the wreckage, who helped people get to safety, who lent people cars and homes and so on. I think one of the lessons of 9/11 is that we're all in this together. We're all Americans here in Coatesville, elsewhere. and we have a common destiny. 9/11 set off a chain of events that has kept us at war, the longest war we've ever had in Afghanistan. And this may not be the last time we are challenged. So we really need to think about how we can stand together, how we can make our country stronger, and when it comes to it, how we can help each other. I'm sure you've heard some personal remembrances from that day. I'll never forget it. I don't think anybody in this audience will. Exactly where you were, what happened, what time, the sequence of events, the first horrific pictures you might have seen on TV. It's something we should never forget. We never will forget. It's seared into our memories. But also the fact that so many people, our firefighters, our first responders, and civilians stood up to make sure others were safe. I remember, I will always remember. I thank you for being here today to also participate in this remembrance.
Thank you, Commissioner, for your good remembrance speech. And it is a day to remember. And of course, the Greystone Society had, from the time we brought the trees back here in 2010, have conducted these ceremonies annually because they feel that they should not be forgotten. Now, I think we have a few minutes before the next bell ringing. Would the band have a number ready? Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen, for that inspiring music. Our director, Jim, said that perhaps while we have a few minutes, I should talk a little bit about the trees and why they're here. Well, I think many of you do know why they're here. it's because of their intimate association with Lucan Steel Company. Next year, 2018, we're getting ready to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the 206-inch rolling mill, which, when it was built and for many years, gave this company the distinction of having the world's largest plate mill. And I have been told by some of our engineering people that a major reason why Lucan's got the contract to roll the steel for the trees was because of that mill. We had the capacity of producing plates of the width to cut 2 out of 1 plate, and of course the thickness. And if you've looked at what is here, you know these are pretty good sized steel pieces. Lucan supplied them. We had, as I remember, there was 152, 19 of the trees on each of the 4 sides of the 2 buildings. And while I was not in the production end of the business, I do remember everybody was very proud of it. It was an extremely visible use of our steel. Much what we make, people don't see. But here it was. And those towers, which were controversial, some people thought they were too big or too aggressive. But the architects did this tree on the very lower floors, which did definitely provide a grace note to those buildings. Then, of course, when 9/11 occurred and all that was left as a smoking, flaming ruin, what we saw, for the most part, was some of the towers still standing. So they became, you might say, the icons of the disaster. A few evenings ago, I gave a little lecture here from the pictures I took during the several trips that we had to New York when we were negotiating with the New York, New Jersey Port Authority to acquire the trees. And someone said to me, "Oh, this is a memento of tragedy." I said, "Yes, but I prefer to call my talk a commemoration of strength," which it was. In 2 ways. The physical strength, and of course, if you look at the photographs of those buildings, you know there had to be enormous pressure on those columns. But also they become a symbol of strength now, and as Commissioner Farrell said, you know, the country was attacked. It was an enormous shock to people. I think the largest shock since Pearl Harbor, but this wasn't 6,000 miles away in the middle of the Pacific. This was right in lower Manhattan. And so they were a shock that they were destroyed. However, New York has recovered. There's a very high new skyscraper in that area, which I'm happy to say the steel plant here put some steel in. So it is growing and it is going on. Our particular connection with the Greystone Society was that while we deeply admire all the heroic actions that went into it, the Greystone Society's basic reason for wanting to get some of these trees back was because the steel was made here. And as we, through our National Iron and Steel Heritage Museum, are attempting to tell the story of steel, and particular as it developed here in Coatesville, we felt getting 1 or 2 of those trees to incorporate in our museum would be really wonderful. We learned that the Port Authority happily kept a lot of things. The City of New York, of course, wanted the whole area cleared as soon as possible. But some of the people in the New York, New Jersey Port Authority who owned those buildings said we have to keep some things for memorial and museum purposes. So 18 or 20 of the trees, along with a great many other things, were taken to an unused hangar out at JFK Airport and stored. We learned about it, and through Skip Houston's good connections with our congressman at the time, we managed to get access and into the Port Authority's offices. So in the summer of 2006, a team of us, Skip, his son Scott, myself, people from the steel company and from the congressman's office, went over to New York, to the Port Authority, went to the airport and saw what was there. And they were very, very enthusiastic about our idea, very cooperative. At that time, however, everything was still tied up in lawsuits. and they couldn't release anything. However, by 2009, the courts had released the authority to dispose of the contents that they had. They didn't want to keep it forever. It was costing $1 million a year to store the material, and they went public with it and announced that they had freedom now to dispose of the collections, and we're going to do so. So the Port Authority had an article in the front page of the New York Times announcing that decision, including a picture that showed part of one of the trees. So I said to Scott Houston, we've got to get back over there, and we did. And we found an extremely cooperative gentleman, his name was Peter Miller, who was in charge of the whole collection there in the airport. And he just thought it was wonderful. And through his cooperation with us, the Port Authority gave us the 10 trees, which we happily brought back, and you see 2 of them here. It was a thrilling, exciting thing, and we're, as I say, honored and deeply humbled to be part of this national celebration of our strength. But it's also a celebration of the strength of this company, in that we had the capacity to produce them. Now, what's going to happen to them? Well, we have long-range plans. Thanks to the steel company, the cooperation of ArcelorMittal, one has been erected as a memorial to steel workers who lost their lives. Our longest plan, of course, is to erect the remaining ones here outside. Now, the Port Authority was very good in recording things. We found that the trees they kept, for the most part, came from the northeast corner of the North Tower. And they documented what was where. So it's our plan, when we get the funding to do it, is to erect those trees at the corner here with great visibility in the same configuration. Echoing Commissioner Farrell's word, the shock never wore off. Despite several trips over to the hangar and seeing all the things there, I always came away with a lump in my throat because the horror of it really never left us. So that's a brief accounting of what we've done and what we're hoping to do. Again, I thank you all, and we'll have a few moments, then we'll have another bell ringing. Thank you.
We were fortunate enough to acquire the 120-inch rolling mill and the motor house last year. The plans have always been to have a Iron and Steel Heritage Museum where there's steelmaking exhibits. That will be the future. So the motor house will be the exhibit space. That's a little further south. And then the rollout shed here will be large artifacts, such as the sonar sphere. The sonar sphere was fitted with listening devices called hydrophones. So each of those circles had a listening device that went into the front of a submarine. This was an actual part that was made here in Coatesville, as were the trees and some other iconic buildings that you may know of. The Seattle Space Needle has Lucan steel in it, St. Louis Arch, the Verrazano Bridge, former Veterans Stadium, oil rigs, and of course, with the current hurricanes, we're aware of what's going on in the Gulf. As a matter of fact, shortly, not so long ago, we had a visitor who had been over at the plant. He worked for Shell Oil. They mentioned the fact that there was something to see here, and he came over to visit. What we have here are the historic homes of Rebecca Lukens and her family, the Houston family, and then the Lukens Executive Office Building. Inside the office building, there are exhibits. So we certainly hope that at the conclusion here today, you'll come inside the office building where there will be refreshments and exhibits and several displays about September 11th. 364 days a year, we talk about the World Trade Center. On September 11th, we commemorate the events of this day. Also this evening, for the first time, we have a musical commemoration performed by the Lukens Band and the 49ers Choir. It'll be an hour beginning at 7 p.m. here, and we hope you'll, if you can, return to join at that time for the musical remembrance.
Scott Houston, the president of the National Iron and Steel Heritage Museum. Just want to thank you all for coming out today. 16th anniversary of September 11th, and it's nice to take a moment to reflect on what that day means to everybody, and the tragic events of Al-Qaeda attacking the New York City and the World Trade Towers and the Pentagon and the events in Pennsylvania. And it's nice to have everybody here today commemorating the victims that lost their lives and the responders, the 343 firemen and policemen that gave their lives that day. And it really means a lot to everybody to just take a moment and reflect, on the events and the people, everyday people going to work on a normal, I think it was a Tuesday, and much like myself, some people were late getting their kids to school, going about their daily lives, and then tragedy struck. And I think what's always remarkable is to reflect on how people helped each other in times of crisis and panic, and going back in to really help one another, regardless of anything but just the fact that we're human beings in need. And I think that's, then you reflect on the outcomes and a tragic event that shocks a nation, and really the help and the outpouring of support that was reflected in the post 9/11 days that followed. So really appreciate everybody coming here today and just taking a moment to reflect in their own personal ways about the events that happened, and to connect to the steel and to the buildings that are no longer there. So I just want to thank everybody again for coming. Thank you.
time is now 9:37. Hijackers deliberately crashed Flight 77, carrying 58 passengers, 6 crew members, into the Pentagon, near Washington. Please observe a moment of silence.
Before continuing with the speakers, I think the band deserves an awful lot of credit. What they've been playing this morning is beautiful, and I was especially moved by the last number, Nearer, My God, to Thee, which is always associated with the Titanic. Now, don't tell me I'm inserting a commercial note, but when the Titanic's wreck was being explored, it was with a submersible called the Alvin, and I'm happy to say that Lucan's put some steel in that as well. No, we couldn't get it back here. It has gone elsewhere. But that song will always be associated with that. Many years ago, I had a passing acquaintance with a gentleman who was a survivor of the Titanic, and I know I was being a bit smart. I said, "Did you remember hearing that number?" He said, "Are you kidding? I was in the water trying to stay afloat until I was picked up." Well, going on with the speakers program, you've heard from the city and the county and now from the state. And it's my pleasure to introduce our state representative, Harry Lewis, who's a very busy man around town and very interested in history. Last Friday, we had the pleasure of attending a ceremony with a landmarking in Coatesville, or in Calhoun, which he conducted. Harry, welcome.
Good morning, and thank you, Gene, for that intro. You know, every time this day comes around, I think about what I thought about last week and the week before, and every time I see an old movie with a picture of the towers in it. All of those reflections reflect to this great day, this memorial. But it also means something to me as far as community. This is such a significant day because it continues to bring us together as a community and as a country. Think of the tragedies and the disastrous happenings with the hurricanes in our country in the last couple of weeks, and as is still going on now. That resolve and keeping people together was a result of what happened on this day in September. So I appreciate all of you. I appreciate this community. I appreciate Lucan Steel Company and the part they had in this significant history. Look at this, made in Coatesville, these iron trees. It only reflects the resolve that we have in our community. The 206 rolling mill, the 120 rolling mill, we take a lot for granted. And you emergency and firefighter organizations, we are so proud. Our police departments, don't ever, ever take any of these gentlemen and ladies for granted. God bless America, and thank you.
And thank you, Representative Lewis, for being part of our program today. Now, I think we have some more music on the program. You gentlemen are ready? Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have about 5,000 visitors here each year, taking tours, looking at the historic homes of Rebecca Lukens and her family, the offices, and now we'll be able to take people at some time in the future into the 120 mill and the motor house. One thing we notice constantly as we go across South First Avenue is the steelmaking process right from its beginning. The scrap trucks roll down South First Avenue. They're particularly busy now with their finishing of the Tappan Zee Bridge and the One World Trade, what we call the Freedom Tower in New York. and now they're working on One Vanderbilt, another skyscraper. But the scrap trucks have been very, very busy coming in. They go down to South Coatesville to the furnace, the electric furnace. And then the process begins there with the scrap going in, being heated and treated. It comes up to we talked about the 206, the 140, which is just south of us, across the creek. This is the rollout shed. These used to be open hearth furnaces, but now the cooling steel, as it comes out of the 206, which is just to our south across the creek, comes up and cools here, and then this plate makes its way over to the west end for distribution, and you'll see tractor trailers taking flatbeds of steel plate out, and once a day you'll see a scrap train come in, Norfolk Southern engines on it, bring the scrap in, and then later in the day they'll take plate out. So it's a wonderful process that's still ongoing. This is the longest continuously operating plant in America, beginning with iron in 1810, and right up to today. It continues the process. So just wanted you to be aware of some of what goes on here in Coatesville. It's not just historical events, it's current events, becoming current projects. Skip Houston, great-great-great-grandson of Rebecca Lukens, reminded me that I ought to note that our band director, Dick, was a master sergeant in the Marine Corps Band. Air Force, excuse me. The time is now 9:59. The South Tower of the World Trade Center in New York collapses. Please observe a moment of silence.
Once again, back to my duties to introduction, but first, I think a huge round of applause is due the Lukens Band. I don't know what we would do without them, so thank you, gentlemen. Okay. Is this almost ready? We have another bell ringing.
The time is now 10:03. Passengers aboard United Flight 93, carrying 40 passengers and crew, launch a counterattack on hijackers aboard their plane to try to seize control of the aircraft. The plane crashes into an empty field in Somerset County, Pennsylvania. Please observe a moment of silence.
Continuing with the program, it's my pleasure to introduce our esteemed Senator, Andrew Dinniman, who will say a few words.
Well, good morning, everyone. And as Mr. DiOrio said, he couldn't resist that comment. Actually, I've been away for the last week, so I might be more talkative than usual, actually. And it's good to see my colleague, Lloyd Smucker there. Lloyd, I was minority chair. Lloyd was majority chair in the House Education Committee. And good to see you, Lloyd. And he's your next speaker. And he's well used to my speaking, I think. First, I went to a most unusual ceremony this morning, in Tredyffrin Township, which is my district, and it was called the Blue Mass. And I knew about the Red Mass, you know, what you do for the judges, but this is a Mass that goes back to 1934 and is done to honor our fire, police, and emergency responders. And it was at St. Isaac's, which is up in Chesterbrook. I also want to note Jean's comments about the Steel Museum here. Remember that the girders, that which held up the towers, was made right here in Coatesville. And in fact, one of them sits right behind us. And it's important we remember that. And as I told Jean, we were able, myself and working with the state, able to get, I believe, $50,000 for this museum. And you know what? We actually got it before they won't spend the money. The check is here. And the first question I asked Jean, did you cash the check? Considering that how broke the state is, unfortunately. But on the serious note, taking the theme which was expressed at Mass this morning, you know, the prophet Isaiah, when the question of who shall it be was asked, he said, "Here I am, Lord. I am ready." Now, you know, in the Hebrew, "here I am," which is hey nani, is not just, "Hey, God, I'm around if you need me," but it means that I give you the full attention. Anything that I will respond. And that's exactly the tradition, isn't it, of our first responders. As the rest of us run away, it's the first responders who go into the situation, who say essentially, "I'm here, I'm ready." It's interesting also that if one looks at the book of Exodus in chapter 38, when Moses took the census of the Israelites, he required that each person, whether you're rich or poor, give a half a shekel as part of the census. A shekel was a coin that was used as payment. And of course, the question the rabbis have asked for generations is, why was it a half a shekel? Why wasn't it a full shekel? Because what Moses was saying and doing is that each of us has a responsibility to the community. Certainly we have a responsibility to ourselves, which is half. But the other half is we have a debt to the community. We have a payment that we give as a member of the community, don't we? And it seems to me that our first responders understand that so well, don't they? They put that half a shekel on the table day in and day out, 24/7. And we're here today to remember those who in the past, who understood their obligation to the community. I think it was Benjamin Franklin who said that, that I don't mind giving to good causes because it's the debt that I pay to be an American. And some of us are rather selfish, aren't we? And others of us are willing to give to the community continuously. Finally, to illustrate this in the best way that I can, allow me to give you an example of what I'm saying and then close this. You know, there's a very famous story about the two seas in Israel. You know, there's the Dead Sea and there's the Sea of Galilee. And they're both fed by the same river, the River Jordan. So the question is, how could the Dead Sea be totally devoid of life? Nothing is there. But on the other hand, how can the Sea of Galilee have the trees and the birds and the flowers and express all God's glory? After all, the water came from the same river. You see, the answer is one of geology, but that's not the point we're going to make. I mean, the Dead Sea is below sea level. But you see, for every drop of water of the Jordan that goes into the Dead Sea, it keeps it. It doesn't give it back to the River Jordan. But for the drops of water that goes into the Sea of Galilee, it returns to the River Jordan. Isn't that what's needed in a society? Isn't that what the first responders do day in and day out? You see, if someone moved by the Spirit of our Father in heaven does not give to the community, then we're like the Dead Sea, aren't we? There's nothing here. We could be as wealthy as a community could be, but we still haven't learned that when you have an abundant harvest, you share it. So the first responders understand that. And as a result of their service, we, as a community, despite 9/11, we still can go forth in hope, can't we? You see, the terrorists wanted to destroy that hope, didn't they? But they haven't done it, have they? Because we're tough as Americans. But in order for that hope to continue to prevail, we continue to have to make sure that there are those of us, no matter what walk of life we're in, no matter what gifts God has given us, there are those of us who will respond day in and day out to what is needed. And today we honor the first responders who understood that so well. And we pray at the end, as we honor those who have perished, as we pay tribute to those who continue the work of responding, we pray that God may give us all the strength to be people of faith, to be people of hope, because America is still the light on the hill, which has so much to offer the world. Thank you.
And thank you, Senator, for your words. They're inspiring. Andy has been a faithful supporter with us. He has taken great interest in and it's wonderful for me to have this opportunity to thank him publicly for being a faithful friend. And yes, I'm happy to say we did cash the check. So we rarely let them go by without being cashed. Well, moving on to the federal government, it's my pleasure to introduce Congressman Lloyd Smucker, who is making his first visit to our Steel Museum, and I'm thrilled to have him here today. Congressman?
Well, good morning, and thank you, Gene, for inviting me to be part of this really moving and wonderful remembrance ceremony. I'd like to thank the National Iron and Steel Heritage Museum for the work that has gone into this and for so many people who have made this possible. I'd like to say also thank you to all the supporters of the museum. You know, I'm new in representing the area, and I find the history of steelmaking and the history of Coatesville absolutely fascinating. So I'd like to thank the Houston family and to ArcelorMittal for their continued dedication to preserving and displaying the many contributions of the people of Coatesville, contributions of the people of our Commonwealth. Part of the story of September 11th, 2001 is the story of some of the most brutal and horrific aspects of humanity. The story of thousands of lives lost at the hands of terrorists. But in the face of that brutality and horror, September 11th also reminds us of the best of humanity. We are reminded of the heroes of that day and the stories of bravery and self-sacrifice. The first responders running up the stairs so that others could run down. The military men and women and civilians at the Pentagon who ran into the fire for their brothers and sisters serving our nation. The 40 brave souls who brought down United Flight 93, less than 200 miles away from this location in Somerset County. And the millions of Americans across the country who consoled neighbors, sheltered strangers, and supported search and research efforts in the months that followed. Pennsylvania has produced some of the greatest examples of valor and bravery that the world has ever seen. It is the birthplace of heroes, and it is the final resting place of heroes. This steel trident, the foundation of the North and South Towers, is a symbol of the heroism of that day. Under extraordinary circumstances, this trident and those it stood with gave all of its strength to keep the towers upright and save as many lives as possible. Like so many of us that day, this trident eventually gave under immense pressure and stress. But when the fires stopped burning and the dust settled, it was there at ground zero, breaching the surface of unimaginable destruction. We're not made of steel, but the flame of the American spirit burns inside each of us. And like this trident, we breach the surface of that destruction. As one nation with resolve in our hearts and freedom in our bones, we rose again. This is what we do in the face of enormous challenge. Our nation comes together. And we're reminded of this again today. You know, as divided as our nation seems to be today, our brothers and sisters in Texas are seeing a tremendous outpouring of support from their neighbors and from strangers. And I fully expect that Floridians will experience the same in the coming days, weeks, and months. We will never be able to fully express our appreciation and gratitude for our first responders, for the 40 brave souls aboard Flight 93, and the ordinary people who did the extraordinary. But we must carry their memory with us each and every day. We owe it to them, the victims and their families, to never forget. It's why this ceremony is so necessary and so important. It's also taking a trip to visit the Flight 93 Memorial in Somerset. It's taking time to contemplate the names on the memorials in Manhattan, the U.S. Capitol building, and the Pentagon. And it's telling the next generation that September 11th wasn't a day that brought the United States to its knees, but rather a day of heroism and self-sacrifice unlike anything the world has ever seen. God bless those we lost and their loved ones, those who ran towards chaos and destruction, and those who continue to protect us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Schmucker, for those excellent words. We're thrilled to have you here on a first visit. Now, I'm going to turn the mic back to Scott Houston, who I think is going to participate in his way in the program.
I know we have a couple minutes here before the next bell ringing, which will be the final bell ringing to commemorate the time of the South Tower collapse. But I think the Congressman's words were really remind me of just the importance of bringing these pieces back to Coatesville. They're the real tangible pieces that connect us all back to a day. I really think that they embody an energy and a spirit that we can all physically connect to. It's one of these days in American history that, pre a day or post a day, it really defines our time when we talk about pre 9/11 or post 9/11. But it's a single day where we all remember, I know this group looking over the ages of the people that were here, that this is a day that we all remember in our own way and experienced it at our own pace. It also was a day that was visually in front of us. It was really, played out on TV in the drama. And I think that, as well, it became a day that the collective memory where we all share. It was very impactful. But we really wanted to bring the trees back to give that tangible reminder that these are the World Trade Towers. This is them. We have more pieces in the back that we're really working hard to bring out, and it's our responsibility, and we need to share them and get them out. And I do need to thank Senator Dinniman for helping us with that effort, and I also would like to remember, and it's not gone, but Joe Pitts was very instrumental in getting us to New York. And that was just an emotional day where back in, I think it was 2006, where we worked with the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey, and just going into the hangar and seeing the remains of the non-personal artifacts that were there, and it was pretty emotional. And working with the Port Authority was great. They were very interested in what we were doing here. They were very interested in where the trees were born, and then they were in New York for a while, and now they're back. And so they really wanted to help tell the story about how the life cycle and steel comes in and it's made something and it hopefully lasts a long time. New Tappan Zee Bridge, for instance, or military purposes. But eventually, it may come back and it may end up in the furnace, and then we'll have a new life. And so they were very interested in the life cycle of steel and how their trees and their steel was once part of that. It was something before it became the World Trade Center in 1969. And we really want to strive to get these open and get these out. But working with the Port Authority was great. A lot of them lost a lot of friends, and they share their stories. And then we also just want to thank the National September 11th Memorial Museum and the people that we've worked with over the years up there to, again, give them some photographs and some construction engineering diagrams and some things that are on display there. And as the Congressman said, I really encourage you to go to New York and go to the museum. It is a nice place of reflection, and it's an important site in American history. And I would also encourage you to go to Somerset and to visit the Flight 93 Memorial as well there. These are important places, and they're real, and to connect with them. But I have the Gene was alluding to. My portion is actually the reading of the names, which I believe we'll do after the next bell ringing, which will take place in a few minutes. So thank you.
The time is now 10:28. The north tower of the World Trade Center in New York collapses. All 16 acres of the World Trade Center site are in ruins. A rescue and recovery effort begins. Please observe a moment of silence.
All right, at this time, we would like to remember those who died on September 11, 2001. Let us remember the 343 firefighters and 71 law enforcement police officers who gave their lives, who rushed to aid the rescue effort. Let us also remember the 55 military personnel who died in the attack in the Pentagon and one law enforcement officer on United Flight 93. There were 353 non-U.S. citizen victims from over 90 countries, including 63 from the United Kingdom, 47 from the Dominican Republic, and 41 from India. Let us now take time to remember those connected to Chester County who died that day by reading their names and ringing a bell and having a moment of silence. Christopher Robert Clark. Christopher was a 34-year-old bond trader for Sandler O'Neill Partners on the 104th floor of 2 World Trade Center. He was born in Devon with a twin brother, Tim, and grew up in Villanova before graduating St. Joe's Prep in 1986. His nickname was Buddha from when he was a baby, and he liked to eat cheeseburgers a lot, apparently, and play golf. But he was married to his wife, Connor Casey Clark, only the previous March, and they continued to live in Philadelphia while he commuted 3 hours to New York each day. He was the son of Janet and Frank Clark. Michael Horrocks. Michael was a United States Marine before becoming first officer in American Airlines Flight 175. He was also the quarterback of the football team and a graduate of Westchester University. He was the husband of Miriam, and his children are Krista and Mick. Kevin Marlowe. Kevin was a graduate of Henderson High School in Westchester, was an associate director in equity sales and trading for Sandler O'Neill Partners on the 104th floor of 2 World Trade Center. He made cameo appearances on The Jay Leno Show and as an extra in a Woody Allen movie, Celebrity. A week prior to 9/11, he completed filming of a reality TV show on the WB network. He was the son of Dennis Marlowe and Rosemary Meyer. George Eric Smith. George worked on the 97th floor of 2 World Trade Center as a senior business analyst with SunGard Asset Management Systems Global Plus. He was a graduate of Phoenixville High School and attended Allentown College. He stayed in New York in a corporate apartment, but came home every weekend to Chester County. He was also a deacon of the Cornerstone Evangelical Free Church in Kimberton and was devoted to his grandmother. His parents are Raymond Smith and Georgia Jackson. And Richard H. Stewart. Richard was a 35-year-old bond trader and Cantor Fitzgerald on the 104th floor of 1 World Trade Center from the Kennett area. He attended Upland Country Day, where he played ice hockey, becoming the school's single-season scoring leader with 42 goals, and a record that lasted 13 years. He went on to play for St. Lawrence University men's hockey team that reached the finals in 1988, and he is currently a member of the university's Hall of Fame. His story became the subject of an award-winning Comcast Sportsnet documentary. We would also like to recognize the Chester Countyans associated with the post-9/11 rescue effort and salvage effort. Chief John DeMarco from Upper Euclid Township Police, Detective Thomas Jones, Upper Euclid Township Police, Mr. Lou Angeli, firefighter of Kennett Square, Mr. James Thompson, New York City firefighter, Mr. Kevin Chandler, VA Fire Department, Andrew Englander, Elverson EMS, Detective Sergeant William Cahill, Westtown East Goshen Police Department, as well as Corporal Timothy Hubbard, Westtown East Goshen Police Department, Detective Robert Bakunis from Westtown Easttown Goshen Police Department, and then from Coatesville we had Dan O'Deans, who served with the American Red Cross. I think he was there about 9/12. And he has been a great member. We Can't thank you enough for the service that they have provided and then continue to inspire. And then this is a letter from the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey, dated August 31st, 2015, that the information conveys the scale of the health issues related to survivors, that there are more than 6,000 people who suffer injuries as a result of the attacks on September 11th, and overall more than 71,000 responders, survivors are receiving medical monitoring or treatment for their 9/11 injuries. September 11th responders and survivors are in every state, and 429 out of the 435 congressional districts nationwide, and more than 22,000 responders and survivors have 2 or more medical-related injuries. And then there are more than, I believe, 4,000 now responders and survivors who have cancer related to 9/11. But as we close today, remember the events of September 11, 2001, for the victims that died that day, as well as the responders and survivors and the legacy that they continue to inspire. I know there's an exhibit and a concert. First time we're having a concert tonight. So again, we really appreciate you being here this morning to commemorate the time, to listen to the Lukens Band and the speeches. So thank you again for being here.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, Creator God, may all of us remember with love and compassion this day. May we grieve with those who still mourn and share memories with those who cannot forget. May we draw strength from those who bravely responded and gave their lives to save others. May we stand with strangers who became neighbors that day and remember their generosity and hospitality. Help us to continue to work for a world free from every form of hatred, violence, and ignorance, and may terrorism, in all its forms, disappear from the face of the earth. Above all, gracious God, may we remember your faithfulness and learn to trust in your unfailing love. Amen.